Pablo, welcome back to another episode of Leaderful. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a while, and I love your shirts. Those of you who are listening can't see it, but Pablo is decked out with some Christmas lights, Christmas light shirt, and so tis the season.
Yeah, I think I've worn it 3 times in the last 10 years, so it's special.
Nice special occasion. I'm really excited about today's conversation because I think it's the missing ingredient in most of the initiatives and the projects that teams and leaders are trying to undertake to drive positive change in their organizations. Inevitably, when we get called in or we get the call to like, hey, we talk about what's going on my team? We start asking questions about, well, how have you designed these interventions or these projects, and what discovery did you do, and did you get to a shared understanding and definition of the problems? And so I'm alluding to a 5D framework that we're going to talk about today that we use when we come alongside clients to help them get to the place of positive impact, right? And so I think all of us, I know myself as a leader, I've been super guilty of just like playing whack-a-mole. I think we've talked about that on the podcast before, where it's like this burnout problem or this employee retention and engagement problem, and I'm trying to figure out how do I like keep it good enough to have some sense of security or some sense of normalcy. And I've been guilty of not going a layer deeper or a few layers deeper into what's really happening here, and how do we do this in a way that brings our team alongside us and engages them in the process, as opposed to throwing them into a training or throwing them into a new process that we've designed that is fundamentally misaligned from what they actually need and care about underneath. And so with that, let's maybe dig into the 5D framework. I'll toss it over to you to maybe give us a high level overview of that, and then we can spend a little bit of time on each of the components so that the listener can, as you prep for 2023, the assumption here is you're listening to this in early January 2023, you can walk away from this episode with some clarity around, okay, this is how I should go about approaching some of these things in the organization. So Pablo, 5Ds, what are they, and go.
Yeah, so the 5Ds, we have, and we'll go into detail in a bit here, but ultimately discovery. So getting curious, finding out what do I know about this from their perspective or that perspective. There's then, once we've done some discovery, getting clearer on defining the problems, the pain points, or what we like to flip and call the opportunities, the most meaningful ones. So really getting clear and defining those. And then, moving to design. Now that we have a clear articulation of these opportunities, how might we, approach them, navigate, solve? Then we've got the delivering the designed project, initiative, campaign, or actions we said we would take, and implementing them. And then we have debrief. We try to use D's as much as possible, which is checking in. What have we learned? What might we need to adjust, change, stop? Like maybe we've already learned the lesson and it's done. And so for anybody who's familiar with the methodologies of agile, lean, design thinking, there's parts of that obviously we've been inspired by and have included into this iterative model for meaningful work. And so just like maybe what we can do next, Jeff, is like just some considerations around, what the 5Ds is meant to represent. And so I'll pass it back over to you, and then that'll give me time to
sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why it's evolved in our work to be this way, and it continues to evolve, it's something that we're always playing with to figure out, is this meeting the needs? Is this having the impact that it needs to have for the team? And that's fundamentally what it comes down to, is the intention impact gap, which listeners will hear us talk about quite a bit. Leaders and teams have good intentions about solving problems or chasing opportunities in their organization for their end users or clients. And the impact often is misaligned with that initial intention, or that often unspoken or unknown intention. And so part of this process is surfacing intentions. It's bringing those to the surface so we can gather around them as a team and say, yeah, that's the thing. Right? We all agree that that's the thing. And actually, you and I were just in a room with a client this week where we started with 6 different problem statements, right, that have emerged from a discovery process. And the process this week was, let's define that so we all know what we're getting ourselves into, and we all have the shared priority. So it's about shared priority, I would say, on the front end. And too often, like you said, what do we know about this from their perspective? The answer is usually nothing. Right? When I ask myself, what do I know about this from the perspective of a frontline employee or someone, in this department? I don't know anything. I've got a lot of assumptions about what I think I know. And so the discovery process is really meant to unearth those assumptions and to get all of the perspectives, or as many as we can, as much data as we can in the system, collect all of the dots so that we can then connect them in a meaningful way. So those two, I think, are probably often a missed step. Often we jump too far and we jump into we think we know what the problem is. And so we start to chase that problem and we see behavior like, well, we just need a training on X, Y, or Z, right? Pick your topic. And so when we think about something like burnout, we just finished up a boundaries before burnout program. And too often something like burnout, the leader's perspective of that is that people need some rest, or they need a day off, or they need a team day, or they need, they'll jump to solutioning, we call it, right, too quickly, right? And then they'll go and take action and they'll hire a trainer to come in and do a workshop on something. And meanwhile, the staff team is sitting there like, wait a minute, like, why am I here? How does this solve my problem? How does this address the thing that's really going on? So we want to avoid that, because not only is that not helpful, that type of behavior where we jump to solutioning too quickly, it's actually damaging, right? So we'll see employees, and I've been there myself, where I roll my eyes a little bit at the next initiative or the next project or the next thing that comes down the pipe, because I know that the last couple didn't meet my needs in a meaningful way. And so we start to actually move the needle in the wrong direction with team engagement and team sense of support for the team. And so I don't know if that was what you were looking for, but a little bit of we're trying to avoid the pain points that are associated with jumping too quickly to thinking we know what is the real need, and then designing and delivering some sort of project or initiative inside of our team or organization.
Yeah, I would say the 5Ds has helped us make sense of where we are in the journey of the work with our clients, and also to bring them along. It's also been a great way to come back and ground ourselves and have we done enough here? Do we need to jump back to a little bit more discovery to actually dig deeper into this signal or thing that we're hearing, but we don't, we have a lot of assumptions about, but really haven't heard from, the people that it's impacting. I would say, when I think about the 5Ds, this model for meaningful work, I would say one thing, the value for me anyways, when I look at the work we do with our clients, is getting there faster and more meaningfully. Because it's not without the model, you eventually the organization might get there. After running so many experiments, they get down to the deep rooted problems. And for us, we want to dig down deep at the beginning, right? What may be the most meaningful, impactful problems or opportunities for us to focus in on? Do we all have a shared understanding of that? And by actually bringing everybody along who's going to impact that, you don't have people, rowing the boat in different directions. You don't have influential members who might have been with an organization for a long time who have said, this is why I started here. This is what I value most. And now you're telling me it's all wrong, right? They haven't been part of that journey to actually see, oh, wow, this is the problem we're trying to solve is maybe different than what we originally started off with. So it's a great, I would say, way to bring people together to create shared understanding, some alignment and buy-in, and then activation. What are the roles that we're each going to play in doing this? And this is not here's the thing I actually want to stress with the 5Ds, is these things can be happening at all times in different parts of your business, right? It's not this linear process. I know as human beings, we like to check boxes and
Have
know
a
that
Gantt chart that says I'm going to do discovery this week and then I'm going to move to this. Yeah,
exactly. And so that's the value, I think, of what we do, because we come in there and I think we're trying to change the perception and the value of consultants, right? I know we offer coaching and training and facilitation, but I have been a consultant where I've come in and I'm like, did I really help? Right? Or will this be another problem next year? And so I think the 5Ds helps us to really dig deep down and have meaningful conversations about meaningful things.
Yeah, it's an accountability mechanism as much for us as it is as a pathway for the client to make meaningful difference in their system. I'm also in the same boat. I've ended projects with clients and been like, was that the problem that we should have been solving for? Is that the thing? And I think, what stands out to me is that the discovery and the definition phases are really where consultants can help move the needle, because we hear things from organizations from within the organizations that have never been surfaced before, or only kind of come out sideways over beers on Friday night, that type of, and that's power dynamics. And we talk about that a lot here at the Ally Co around understanding and navigating power dynamics. But sometimes if HR is trying to do discovery, I mean, you've been in that role before, and so maybe I could pass it back to you about like what some of the challenges are when you're a part of the system, trying to learn about the system in a meaningful way that you never can quite get to the root of it. And that's especially true, I think, of things like psychological safety, or if there's conflict or tension in an organization, it's really can be quite challenging to get to. But your experience as an HR practitioner, people and culture leader, and as a consultant, the difference in approach, especially on the front end, that discovery phase. Thoughts?
Yeah, I always see the struggle with organizations wanting to do that themselves, right? Like, I remember I worked for one of the best workplaces in Canada. It was such an amazing experience, and I remember us having conversations about, like, yes, we're known for this type of work, but should we be doing that own work ourselves? Like, is that a hat I should be wearing in my role? And until I met you and started to understand more about power dynamics and types of power, I wasn't aware, right, of the especially if you are an HR leader who has moved up in the organization, where you might have been at an equal par level power with most of your colleagues, and now all of a sudden, because of a title change, a role change, or accountability change, you are in an up power position, and therefore that relationship has changed, right? The power dynamics are different. And so, I mean, I don't know if this is a surprise for anybody, but as consultants, people tell us more than they would otherwise tell, their bosses, their leaders, or their HR folks. And so I do think that there's a role for external parties like allies such as us to really gather that data. I think the other feedback we've received too is the way that we hold on to that data in a confidential and protective way allows people to share more, because ultimately the goal is to get that organization to a place where those conversations are happening openly. We talk to so many leaders that are so afraid or conscious of what people are saying, in the back channels. And it's like, well, first of all, they're probably not talking as much as you think about you, and it's probably something different. But wouldn't you rather have those conversations out in the open, right? Where assumptions can be cleared, where solutions can be co-created to have the actual impact they're intended to have, right? Like, wouldn't you? We do that with our clients,
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I guess my whole ramble there was, being conscious that not every job in this space of collecting feedback perspective can be done by the internal organization. You need help.
Yeah. Yeah. And then once you have that information, oftentimes there's still a process of defining, or that's the next step, right? So we've done some discovery, and that can look like impact surveys. That's one tool that we use. We'll also do one-on-one interviews with key stakeholders or representation, depending on the size of the organization, sample groups that, belong to a kind of persona, or, the more classic like type of employee that we have, or level of system, or all of those different things go into getting a good, robust discovery. Then we get to the place of definition. Like, what does this data mean? And this is where there's some traps too, I think, for leadership teams. And I know I've been guilty of that, where I look at a set of data, I look at the engagement survey, and I start to pick out what's meaningful to me. It's like, ooh, that's really pinchy. And so that draws my attention. Or, hey, it actually says we're doing really well here, so I'm going to just focus on that, and I'm going to dismiss this other pinchy feedback. There's a lot of that sorting, filtering based on what we care about as leaders, or where our sense of maybe at risk or fear might be in the system. And so sometimes we will lose that in the definition process, and we'll just, I hear this from employees where it's like, yeah, the employee engagement survey is just a checkbox exercise to say that we were consulted, but leadership's going to do whatever they want anyway. They've already got their roadmap and their budget, and they're like, this is just a checkbox type activity. We really want to obviously avoid that. And I think most leaders would want to avoid that, because that doesn't actually help us close that gap between our intention and our impact. When it comes to defining problems, what are some approaches, or what's a way that we can kind of think about that as a leader? How do we get to maybe more of the root problem, as opposed to some of the surface level things, or our own favorite things that we want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of great tools and models out there to help you dig deeper. I think, oh, man, where do I start? One thing I would say is make it collaborative. right? We talk about diversity, inclusion. We talk about people feeling included, learning together in their way through failure, mistakes, even. We talk about being able to contribute and to challenge. And so I think when we're thinking about like how do we dig deep down into those problems, like those things have to happen, right? So
Mhm.
it's not one person sitting in a room digging down on their own to what the problem may be based on their own truths and their experiences. Though that is valuable, it needs to be understood in the bigger system, right?
Yeah,
So, everybody's heard of the 5 Ys, I'm assuming, or a lot of us have, and that's still a good
that's an
one.
assumption.
That's an
That's an
assumption.
assumption. There's probably people that haven't that are listening. They're like, "What do you mean 5 whys?"
But now you will after hearing this, you might Google it. It's an oldie but a goodie, I would say. But how you go through the 5 Ys, I believe that's where you can have some you know different approaches to doing it. I think we borrow a lot from the design thinking approach of who is this problem impacting, uh, what is the problem have that is actually happening, where is it happening, when is it happening, how might it be happening, and then why does this matter, like why should we care about this, right? And you can even add it later to the whys, like why is this important or highly impactful to the individuals, the who, to the organization, to our clients. You can start to think about the ecosystem that's there to really understand why does this matter, why should we focus on it.
Mhm.
But I think the 5 Ys, that's always a good one because we tend to, as human beings, focus on things we can see and easily make sense of at the surface. Um, and so the 5 Ys, and then really articulating it with a statement that's clear and concise, makes it easier for people to understand, challenge, contribute to, and have meaningful conversations around. And so, you know, that experience though, like it sounds easy. Oh yeah, boom, write that out, go through 5 Ys. But we did a session the other day with 6 leaders, and I think it took us 2 hours, and that was a sprint just to get to an area of like maybe third layer down or fourth layer down. And so I think you need to create space to have conversations as people are thinking through that. And it's less about the perfection of the statement because I think we can get caught up in that. And so bullet points, use bullet points. Maybe
Mhm.
that's a cool tip.
Yeah, yeah, it's wrestling with the data and the sense that we've made of that data to get to a place of shared understanding. And I like the 5 Ys. Like you said, it's an oldie but a goodie. And we did it in this session. We did it in a different way that I actually haven't done it before. And we had people rotate around these different problem
Mm,
statements. So we had 6 leaders, 6 initial problem statements up on the board. Start with the top. Things like lack of role clarity, as an example, right? And then as it individually, they just walked around the room. We gave them a few minutes to dig that layer deeper. And so we ended up getting each leader having some input on each problem. And I think it really helped get that sense of shared understanding or the sense of collaboration on this problem. Because the danger, of course, is that a leader or someone with power will take that away and they'll do their own 5 Ys and they'll spit something out and people will just nod their heads in agreement, but they haven't actually engaged with that problem in a meaningful way. They haven't had their input, their perspective isn't yet shared. So I loved seeing different handwriting, different colored pens on all of these different sheets because it meant the team did that together. And I think one of the things that's most important about coming out of the definition phase before we head into design is that shared sense of, yes, we agree that this is the thing that we're tackling, because that lack of agreement, if there's a little bit of tension around, no, I still don't think that's the thing, anything that comes out of that is going to be, there's going to be easy for a leader to step back and say, well, I didn't think that was the problem we were needed to solve in the first place. And I think we really
yeah.
need to avoid that in organizations.
Yeah, I've seen, so when I've facilitated some of those sessions, I've seen another outcome as well where there there really is a difference of perspective in what the actual problem is. And so it's not like we have to sit in the room till someone gets tired and says finally, yeah, I agree, let's do that. No, why don't we test both of those out? Right? That's the beauty of this, right? If if there is that, usually we find alignment in at least running an experiment to validate some of those assumptions or strengthen that definition. But sometimes I've seen like A and B. Let's A and B test this. how might that look like? How will we collect data? At which point do we make a decision? Maybe there are actually two problems here that if we concurrently approach them will help us, from a larger impact. So I'd say that openness, I think, when you're doing this work, there's this just the openness, to know that, to remove all constrictions. We talk about divergence when we're doing this work. I think the definition, while it allows us to converge and get very clear about a problem, like if it feels wrong at one point, we can just re-diverge and move to another. So that's something important, that it's not so, there is a bit of structure, but it doesn't mean, oh, we've committed to this thing, we got to keep doing it till the end.
Totally. Yeah. And that leads us into a conversation about design, probably. So once we have a statement or a couple of what we think are the root, or at least the level of system and the impact and feasibility, like there's all of that conversation has to happen, because just because you identify a problem doesn't mean we're going to rush out to solve it, because we may not have the budget, the resources, the time, like whatever that is. So there's a prioritization exercise there that says, yeah, this is the thing that we can bite off in the first quarter or the first half of the year or whatever. And then we lead into design, which is the how might we, right? How might we actually solve this problem? Like, what are the different pathways? Like, is this a simple problem that has a recipe that we can follow? Is this a complex problem where we need to actually circle back and do some more discovery, right? Where we need to just do something and see how the system reacts to it, right? Because we don't know for sure. There's lots of, I think, things that can go into the design process, and that's probably its own separate episode. How do we do each of these could easily be their own separate conversation. So at a high level, and I'll try and keep it a high level, designing, what does that look like? And how should we think about, now that we've defined something, stepping into our designer roles and saying, how might we solve this, or how might we move this in a meaningful way?
Yeah, there's a couple, like two of the ways that I've really enjoyed doing this is we have this problem statement and we flip it into an opportunity statement, which could be as easily as adding another sentence to say the opportunity here is to whatever it is. The other, some people might have heard of the how might we statements, and it's like how might, and so here you can do a very collaborative ideation session where you get different perspectives on, like, is everybody clear on this problem we have? And maybe it's about inviting people that have been part of the definition to actually test its strength. Like, does it make sense? Is it clear? Do they have questions about it? This is your opportunity to have more meaningful conversation and strengthen it up. But when you flip it, you have them flip. What's the opportunity here? And come up with these different ideas. That's all the how might we approach this, or how might we approach this. That's a great one. There's a design challenge statement you can write. That's from human-centered design thinking. But the exciting part is this is all about ideation and exploring the different ways we might approach the problem. And from there, you start to design, okay, so if that, if we're going to do it this way, what would success look like? How will we know that we're headed in the right direction, that we learned something here? And I think working back, we start to then, this is a project. I think too many people and teams don't treat it as a project, and therefore it doesn't show up. Whether it's on budgets or operationally, it's not talked about at a larger organizational level. And so it can just fizzle out, lose energy, or be seen as it's not a priority. So I would say make it a project. And we've got a great Spurs model. I don't know if we've done a podcast on what Spurs is, but to really capture the power behind a project, identifying roles, the urgency of it, the scope of it, the rhythms for the team, like all those things can start to come together as you design the project.
Yeah, totally. We'll carve that out as a separate podcast sometime in the next couple of months. We'll sit down and dig into that, or maybe we'll get some designers on. That's probably what we'll do, is we'll get some guests on that do the specific design. I know we know some folks, and we have some members of the team that we could actually engage in that conversation too. So let's park that for a second. The delivery actually is pretty straightforward at the end of the day. It should be pretty straightforward, but there's a few key ingredients that I think about when I think about delivery. Is the real world nature of it. Real time, real world, like let's make sure that we're actually oriented to solving the problem and we're not kind of getting off track or we're getting too abstract or theoretical, right? There's a team-based aspect of delivering things, right? Is the system level, right? How is the team engaged in this? And so from a learning and development perspective, which is one way to approach growth or impact in an organization, it means probably not taking an individual leader and shipping them off to something that they need to change and grow some skills, and then expecting them to come back and change the system. It's let's slow that down and let's take the whole team through a process, right? And team learning, I think, is more effective. And I think that in this hybrid world of work, then this remote world of work, that's becoming more and more evident that it's a team thing that needs to occur there. And then action oriented, right? Are we actually taking action in the learning, in the consulting, in the coaching, whatever it is that we're doing to help move this system? It has to be that, action oriented in the moment, and kind of skill. Like, are we building the awareness, the willingness, and the skill to keep moving this problem forward? So that's, and I know we're going to run short on time. Actually, it's 25 minutes. We got a learning and action session starting here shortly. So I'll cut this all out. The last piece is the debrief. And so when you think about the benefits of a debrief, and I actually think it's a missing ingredient. It's a missing ingredient for us. I don't think we take the time to always debrief as thoroughly as we could to learn and to affect change for the next iteration of this. This really is a loop that we need to affect. But when you think about debriefing, what's a low-hanging fruit for a team to do a bit more of the debriefing on this process?
I mean, the low-hanging fruit is just build it in as a milestone key activity of the project, and not necessarily at the end, right? We always think debrief is at the end, but debrief could be continual rhythms of feedback. I would say debrief, even though we have it in our model at the end, and yes, there should be this kind of transition into the next thing or sharing of learning. Well, but what I think debrief, more importantly, should be built into all of those pieces, and that's why it's kind of this iterative system. Asking regularly for feedback for the people that are running the project, responding to that feedback in a timely manner, right? Requesting specific feedback about, in case it's not clear, the things you are trying to impact. They should be. And then also there's like, how do we empower and have some accountability on the people that we are creating this for to share feedback, to speak up, right? So I would say within the realm of communication, I would say that's a huge characteristic of great debrief.
Yeah. Awesome. So in a nutshell, 5Ds, we've got a discovery phase where we're learning about the system. We're collecting as much information and data as we can. We have a definition phase where we're getting really clear on the problem and the opportunity, a shared understanding of that. We move into design, which is the how might we, and what are some of the constraints and how do we navigate that, and really building a meaningful project or initiative. And then we get into the delivery, which in an ideal world is team-based, it's real world and real time, and it's action oriented. And then I love your point on debriefing. That should be an ongoing process. It should be feedback mechanisms built in. And then there is probably room for postmortems, those where we actually sit down with the team and say, okay, this initiative is done. The training is over. What did we learn? And what are we going to do different next time? And we are going to dig into the 5Ds over the next month or two. And actually, we're queuing up an opportunity for the community to engage in some of that in real time with some real data as we go. And so we'll stay tuned for that. We'll be launching a culture survey for the community in the coming weeks. And so stay tuned for some of those communications, because I think this is a critical piece that's missing, I believe, for most teams and leaders, is we jump to solutioning on problems that we maybe don't understand fully or isn't the real thing that we need to be addressing. And it shows in things like burnout and employee engagement and some of the problems that are front and center for a lot of leaders and teams these days. Anything to add, Pablo, before we wrap today's conversation?
I'd just say, for our listeners, the new year's coming, and with that comes a lot of great intentions. And so I would say reach out, because if anything, if you can get budget for anything, I would say do a discovery. Like, work with a team, hopefully ours, to really collect and capture all the dots before you try to connect them and implement something. And even if you can carve out budget to say, hey, what if, like, as a proof of concept, or to show here's where we think the most value and impact is, based on this small, you have this information now to you can make a decision that's informed, right? And if you're feeling like you're in a position of down power, discovery work is a very powerful way to show, like, this is the need, this is the impact. How can you say no to this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Love it. All right. Until next week.